What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Two Wheeled Rider YouTube channel. My name is Mario Orsini, and tonight we're going to talk about a KTM recall. All right, so as many of you know, I ride a 2016 KTM 1290 Super Adventure. I got this recall notice, or at least it was sent out on March 1st of this year. I'm recording this on July 9th. It's going up on July 11th. And what this is, it's a recall about the fuel tank, and it only affects the 2015 and 2016 KTM 1290 Super Adventure models. To my knowledge, it doesn't affect the 1190 models. It also does not affect the 2017 Super Adventure models, which, at least in North America, they changed the name to the Super Adventure T in 2017. Does not affect them, and I don't think it necessarily affects every single 2015 and 2016 model. But you should have gotten one of these letters in the mail already, so I'm not really making this video about that. I wanted to give you a little bit more information about this recall and how it's being handled. So I'm not going to read this entire thing to you, but basically what's happening is, if you've ever disassembled your bike or you've ever watched my videos where I'm constantly ripping the tank off of mine, down at the base of the tank where the tank cover goes on, there is a brass set of threads that go in there, and then there's like a plastic rubbery type grommet that it sits in. That's where the leak is occurring, at the base of it. I'm going to try to throw some images up on the screen right now to show you exactly what I'm talking about. For 2017, they'd already updated that piece in there. I guess they recognized already that it was a potential failure, so they'd fixed it. On the 15 and 16 models, though, it is prone to failure, which, if you're familiar with how the bike's set up, that part of the tank sits right over top of your airbox, which sits right over top of the rear cylinder. So obviously, if you have gas leaking out of there, potential fire risk. So what they're doing is this. If your tank is not currently leaking, you can take your bike back to the dealer. What they're going to do is retrofit in the new grommet, the new piece. They've got to punch that out of there and then put the new piece in. You're exactly like 2017 model bikes where it already had the new piece in. It's just a retrofit. If your tank is leaking, you're getting a brand new fuel tank. And that was the case with mine. The reason why I waited a while is because, I had no reason to really take the bike apart. And depending on how much fuel you have in your tank, the way that tank's set up, obviously a lot of the fuel gets carried toward the bottom when it's not full. And that was the case with mine because it wasn't sitting in that back area. So I didn't notice any sort of leakage. What happened was, I was working on that rear cylinder. You guys may remember when I went to Alaska last year, I had a little bit of an oil leak there from one of the valve cover bolts. Come to find out, it was stripped, so I put a Healy coil in. I was working on that, and while my tank was sitting off on a piece of pasteboard, pretty much full at that point, after it sat there for a few hours, I noticed there was fuel leaking out of it onto the pasteboard. It was pretty easy to see. So anyway, at that point, I called my dealer, Ride on Moto, who I've mentioned plenty of times in these videos in the past, and said, hey, I'll bring the tank up. Mine's actually leaking. So in speaking with the warranty guy up there, obviously they'd done quite a few replacements with putting the new piece in. They hadn't actually seen one yet that had failed and was actually leaking. Mine was the first. That said, mine has over 30,000 miles on it, and most of the bikes they were getting in had 12,000 miles or less on them, many of them much less than that. So I took that up there on May 25th. They contacted KTM, let them know mine was leaking. I told them no big hurry because Chris and I are getting ready to leave in a couple of weeks for our European trip. Noah had a race or two within there, so I wasn't going to get to ride much anyway, so no big deal. I got back here a little over a week ago, stopped by the shop. Actually, it was a week ago today as of filming this. Stopped by the shop. Still, I don't have the new tank. My tank was still sitting in the back. My bike's been sitting out in the garage with the fuel tank off of it for, over a month now. And I made a joke to John. I was like, well, if I would have known that, I was literally at the factory. I just would have asked him for a new tank. So in speaking with the warranty guy up there, he said he'd actually gotten a call from KTM the week before. I think asking for proof that the tank was actually leaking, or maybe they were just confirming that it was actually leaking. because just about every dealer is asking for a brand new tank, or at least that's what we've derived from that, because that's much easier to do. It's easy. You have to take the tank off either way. So while it's just easier to swap tanks than it is to take the time to punch that out, put the new piece in. Apparently, that takes a while, and you also take the chance of, if you don't do it right, you damage the tank. So anyway, I have been without a fuel tank for well over a month. So what we ended up doing this past Friday, I called John Ross up at Ride on Moto, or last time I saw him, I was like, hey, is there anything we can do to just fix this thing? In the meantime, I want to go ride this upcoming weekend. So he said, sure. So John and I worked in the back of the shop late last week. Basically what we ended up doing is drilling out the spot there where the brass and that grommet is, drilled that thing entirely out. We took some 2-part epoxy, and I'll show it to you here in a second. And we epoxied that whole section in, took some Honda bond around the sides. I did go out and test it out on this past Sunday, so a couple of days ago. I went out and put 60, 70 miles on it. I also just checked it a few minutes ago. It's not leaking at all. Everything's holding fine. It's not the prettiest thing, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second, but it's holding. So that is my temporary fix for now until we get the new tank in. Once we get the new tank in, obviously we'll swap them out. So let's cut out to the garage. I'll show you what John, mostly John, I just helped a little bit, was able to do to get me back on the road, and then we'll cut back here and we'll wrap up. All right, so you can see the temporary fix right here. We used a 2-part epoxy. Basically what we did, if you're familiar with the tank, it's got one of these where we're gonna put the tank cover in down here. That's the part that was leaking. John drilled that out. We used a 2-part epoxy to fill this in. We put some Honda bond around it. The prettiest thing in the world? No, but it's all gonna get covered up by the seat and the tank cover. So once I get the rest of the stuff on here, I'll show you what it looks like before we put the seat back on. So here's what it looks like with the seat back on and the tank cover on. I mean, you can't see anything there, so you'd never even know that we had that 2-part epoxy under there. And also, this thing's held on by like 6 different screws, so it's not going anywhere. So anyway, as you can see, not the prettiest thing, but once the tank cover goes on and the seat goes, you don't see any of it anyway. So anyway, I'll update you guys when I actually get the new tank in, and I'll see if there are any differences between or anything I can notice. I doubt there's going to be, but I should have a brand new fuel tank, I don't know, hopefully within a few weeks or so. But in the meantime, this thing will keep me going. I'm lucky to have such a great dealership close by to me and Ride on Moto. Those guys are all about riders and racers and keeping us going, whether it's on the racetrack or on the road. So huge thanks to John Ross and the rest of them up at Ride on Moto. Love those guys. And I'm planning on going out and doing about 500-600 miles on Saturday. So anyway, that's the latest update on this recall. I mentioned earlier I have over 30,000 miles on my bike. Aside from this recall, there was another recall, and I did a video on it. I'll link it up here. Basically, it involved like 10 seconds of work and a zip tie. The only other issue I've had on my bike, aside from that small oil leak, which was probably my fault for stripping out the threads, was the sticky fuel float, which is a pretty easy fix. You can take it to the dealer. They'll fix it if you're still under warranty, or you can just follow the instructions in the video I'll link up here. That's it. I mean, there's the only problems I've had with the bike. 30,000 miles, no real issues. Obviously, this tank's a bit of a bummer, but, once we get a new one on there, or if, depending on, if yours wasn't leaking, they get that fix done, you should be good for tens of thousands of miles to go. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button, because if you like motorcycles, well, this is the place to be. If you have any questions about this tank recall, let me know down in the comment section below. I'll do my best to answer them. And as always, I'll talk to you again soon.